I'm John Neal, and I want to tell you how to make the HTML5 gang sign. Take your left hand and hold up a peace sign. Then take your right hand and make 3. 2 plus 3 equals 5. But when you put them together, you make an H with 2 hands. That stands for HTML5. Don't mess with HTML5.
Welcome everyone to the Kendo UI Q1 2012 online keynote. We're really pleased to have you here today. This is a huge event and we've been preparing very hard over the last 3 or 4 months to develop some really amazing updates to everything we introduced officially at the end of 2011. And today we're going to share a lot of information with you, show you what's new, as well as showing you how you can get started working with all the cool new things in Kendo UI. Before we get started with that, I want to make sure that you're aware of where you can continue the conversation beyond today's online keynote. Of course, what we're showing you today is going to be fun and exciting, but we'll be continuing to show you all the new and fun things you can do with Kendo UI for the next several weeks and even months. And the best way to keep up with all those new updates is to join us online, and you can follow us on Twitter at Kendo UI or join us on Facebook, facebook.com/Kendo UI, and we'd love to continue the conversation with you there after today's event. For those of you who I have not met previously or for who didn't join us in our last online keynote, my name is Todd Anglin. I'm Vice President for HTML5 Web and Mobile Tools here at Telerik. And if you have any questions about the things you see today in Kendo UI or you just want to connect online, you can find me on Twitter at Todd Anglin, and I'll be sure to share my email address through the course of today's presentation as well. But I will be your host for today's webcast, showing you all the new things and giving you the high-level overview of what's new in Q1 2012. And I'll be calling a few additional presenters to the virtual keynote stage today to help you see how you can use all the latest and greatest things inside of this release. So let's talk a little bit about Q1 2012, the official release of Kendo UI that we're all gathered here for today. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the significance of where we've come from to arrive at today's big milestone. First of all, by being here today as part of this live online keynote, you are part of a huge audience that's here to really learn all about what's new. There are thousands of people connected live right now, virtually spread across the entire globe, joining us to see what's new in Kendo UI. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy days to come spend an hour with us and see what's new in Kendo UI. Now, we know we had a few little technical glitches in the last online keynote, so we've made some system changes, so hopefully your experience today will be much better, and hopefully you can enjoy all of today's content with none of the glitches that we had when we got overrun with people in the last online keynote. So thank you for joining us and being part of today's huge audience. If you do have any technical challenges, yes, this is being recorded, and yes, an on-demand version will be made available after the live event on the official Kendo UI YouTube channel. So if you have any trouble, we'll make that available to you as soon as the event concludes. If you're just joining us for the first time in Q1 2012 with Kendo UI, let me reiterate very quickly what Kendo UI is and why we're creating it. Kendo UI is everything you need to build sites and mobile apps with HTML and JavaScript. And when we set out to build Kendo UI from the very beginning, we aimed to solve a very simple problem. If you're trying to build software, whether it's websites or mobile apps, with HTML and JavaScript today, very often the process begins with the assembly of a so-called Frankenstein framework. You usually start with a core JavaScript library, something like jQuery, and then you find yourself hunting and sorting and evaluating hundreds of little plugins that you have to assemble, integrate, glue together, maintain, and then oftentimes evolve with your project in order to have that foundation that you need before you can ever do any development on your actual application. So you spend a lot of time not only assembling this, but then maintaining it, and that can be a real challenge if your goal is to build professional software and you just want to get to the actual aspect of building your software. Kendo UI aims to replace the frustration that represents by giving you a simple place to get everything you need in one place, one source of support, one library to update, and give you that peace of mind that what you have is supported, is evolving on a public roadmap, and can support your needs now and in the future. And we do that through 3 distinct pieces: Kendo UI Web, Kendo UI Data Viz, and Kendo UI Mobile. Kendo UI Web is one of the key pillars of Kendo UI and one of the first things we introduced when we started the betas for Kendo UI last year. And it represents a collection of rich UI widgets made up of HTML5 and JavaScript and core framework components. There are more than 15 UI widgets in Kendo UI Web today, and those widgets represent everything from rich grid interfaces, which support editing and grouping, all kinds of great things, to simpler widgets, but also very valuable things like date pickers and numeric input. In addition to that, there are a number of less visible but equally valuable core framework components. Things like a JavaScript data source, which you can use to bind your UI widgets. Things like localization and validation, so that you can localize currencies and localize date formats to wherever your users are when they're visiting your website, and make sure if they're entering any values that they actually enter the values you want to collect through your site. Of course, HTML5 provides some of these core technologies at the standards level, but we know that your users aren't all using the latest and greatest versions of browsers, and you need to support bigger audiences, and Kendo UI Web can help you do just that. Kendo UI DataViz, meanwhile, delivers to you plugin-free HTML5-powered charts, and with the latest release, we'll talk about the extension of that, gauges. Kendo UI DataViz builds on core technologies, mainly SVG and VML, to provide broad support across desktop browsers as well as mobile devices like iPhones and tablets, so that you can take your DataViz with the rich animations and have it reach all of your users wherever they're accessing your sites or your apps from. And it does it very easily, so you can just provide your data, however you get your data to your app, and it very fluently, very quickly spits out these beautiful charts that you can provide to your users. And the third tentpole of Kendo UI today is, of course, Kendo UI Mobile. And we introduced this as an early preview with the last release. We introduced a beta for Kendo UI Mobile at the beginning of this year. And of course, today's release marks the official introduction of Kendo UI Mobile. And it's going to be a big part of what we talk about today. So we'll save the deeper discussion for Kendo UI Mobile till later in today's keynote. But Kendo UI Mobile makes up the third part of Kendo UI Web and DataViz to represent everything we provide to help you build your sites and mobile apps. And we've been really pleased with the progress so far. In the 3 or 4 months since we've introduced Kendo UI officially, we've delivered more than 6 updates, and this includes service packs and hotfix builds, which have been available directly and immediately to our commercial customers, as well as a couple of betas. We've received more than 350 ideas through the Kendo UI user voice site, things that you have told us that you want to see in future versions of Kendo UI, and we look at those every day, and we're using that to help us prioritize what do we do next in Kendo UI. And in fact, if you have ideas today or you want to share some feedback with us, go over to kendo.uservoice.com and let us know what you think, or vote on the existing ideas that you find there. We have more than 6,200 posts in the official Kendo UI forums on kendoui.com. So we're building a very vibrant and active community around Kendo UI and the various pieces of Kendo, and people are coming together, helping each other, receiving help from the Kendo UI team, and building some pretty incredible projects. And of course, a number we're really proud of, we've got more than 22,000 downloads of Kendo UI since introducing it in December of last year, which we're really excited about. All told, Kendo UI has been very well received. The feedback we've seen online has been very positive, and we really love seeing what you guys build with Kendo UI and all the great things you can do with HTML5 and JavaScript, and we're just getting started. So let's talk about one of the next steps we're taking, the first of 3 major releases for this year, by looking at what's new in Q1 2012. And we'll start by talking about what's new in Kendo UI Web. There are 3 main new things in this release of Kendo UI Web. 2 new UI widgets, the list view and the editor widgets, and 1 new core framework piece, MVVM. The list view is a new widget which provides a very powerful way for taking data and having complete control over the way each item is presented, while still carrying some of the powerful features you might find in a grid, things like paging and sorting. Where the list view differs from a grid is the grid restricts you to columns and rows, and of course you have templates, but it's still primarily column and row layouts. The list view gives you an item template and an edit template, and you have complete flexibility to define how every item is displayed. So it's a much more flexible presentation with the power of a grid. Meanwhile, the editor gives you a rich text editor that you can use across all major browsers, allowing your users to modify and work with HTML in a visual way, and for you to receive the same HTML output on the back end when those results are collected, which is a real important thing to do if you want to maintain consistency between your editors and between browsers. And the Kendo UI editor will now do that for you. The third piece, which is less visual but very powerful, especially for those of you that prefer the approach of MVVM for your development, is the freshly built Kendo UI MVVM implementation. And MVVM, or Model View View Model, is a style of development which allows you to easily bind UI widgets to a view model which represents the state and the data for that particular view. And developers that like this approach, I think, will love the new Kendo UI MVVM because it's been built for performance, and out of the box it seamlessly integrates with all the Kendo UI widgets. Of course, there are other improvements in Kendo UI Web in this release as well, things like aggregates added to the grid, as well as new editing modes, and the ability to initialize all Kendo UI Web widgets from data attributes. So if you prefer that approach to initializing widgets as opposed to using script, that's now supported as well. The best way to really, though, get a grasp on all that's new in Kendo UI Web is to see some of it in action. So I'm going to invite to our virtual keynote stage here one of my colleagues, Burke Holland, a Kendo UI evangelist. Hopefully you've talked with him online. If not, I'm sure he'd love to hear from you at Burke Holland on Twitter. And Burke's going to explain to us a little bit more about what this MVVM thing is and how you can use the new Kendo UI MVVM and list view in some quick demos. So Burke, the stage is yours.
All right, Kendo UI introduces a slew of complete awesomeness in this release. Let's take a quick look at some of that new goodness. We're quite pleased to introduce a brand new MVVM architecture baked right into the very foundation of Kendo UI. But let's take a step back and explain exactly what the MVVM pattern is and why it's not only very important for building web apps, but why it makes your life remarkably easier. Web applications are becoming more and more complex on the client. There's an increasing number of not just operating systems, but devices as well. Quite possibly the best way to build applications that run across all of these platforms is naturally to build a web app. This leads to the need to be able to structure your code in a very organized way. One of the ways that you can do this is with something called the Model View View Model architecture, commonly referred to as simply MVVM. That's what it is, but let's take a look at how it works specifically with Kendo UI. A lot of times the way that you'll see this demonstrated is with a to-do list, but I wanted to do something a little less boring. I've created something called a playlist editor, and this is just a simple application to help me keep track of songs on my local machine. On the left-hand side, I can add tracks, and on the right-hand side, it keeps a running list. This application currently has no functionality. Let's see how we might implement this with plain old jQuery. Now we're going to do it what we'll just refer to right now as the old school way. In the old school way, we can attach a click event to the create button, and then with all this ugliness, do a row on a table, attaching in the values from the create form, and then we'll clear the form back out. And this works just fine. We can come back over to the application and we can put in some test data, and this test data will show up on the right hand side when we click the add track button. Great. But let's see how we can make this much more awesome using the new MVVM framework in Kendo UI. All we need to do to switch this over to the new MVVM binding is to remove this here, and we'll put in the new school MVVM. And the new school is to use this Kendo observable object, which creates a view model, and the view model has properties on it that will be bound to the UI. So the tracks array will actually hold our collection of tracks, and then these properties here will be bound to inputs on the create form. And this create function is what will be called on the click event of the create button. This one line down here is what tells Kendo UI to bind the relevant portion of our UI to the view model. Now, because we are using MVVM, we do need to modify our markup just slightly. So I'm going to remove this definition list and we'll put in the new school one. And this is pretty much the exact same thing, except we now have the introduction of these data bind attributes, which says to bind the value of this input to the album property on the view model, and we'll do that for the rest of the inputs as well. Also, we're going to bind the click event of the create button to the create function on the view model. Lastly, I want to get rid of this table because this is not a great user experience, and instead I want to have a Kendo UI grid, so let's do that. That one line is all it takes with the new MVVM binding to create a Kendo UI grid. We set the data-role to grid and say that we're going to bind its source to be the tracks array. And because we're using this new data binding syntax, we can say data-sortable equals true, and this will automatically turn on sorting in our grid. It's just that easy. Let's pop over, refresh our application, and have a look. That's a much better user experience. We can add in a new album here and filling in the information that I know. And when I actually click this Add Track button, this will, instead of updating the UI, will update the view model, and the view model will in turn update the UI. And you can see that I can sort by these columns, and they are sortable because we set the data-sortable attribute on the grid to be true. So let's look at how we can even improve this more by using one of the brand new widgets in this release of Kendo UI, the list view. Let's also change and get our data from the server instead of from an array of information. So let's create a new data source, and this data source will specify that we're going to read the tracks.json endpoint, and then here we're mapping our model object in the schema on the data source and setting what field is the ID and then what the fields of the model are. And then we can go ahead and get rid of this tracks array down here. That looks good. Let's go up and remove the grid. So we'll take this grid out and we'll add in a list view. And the list view is just defined as data-role equals list view. And then the source is set to the tracks data source, which is the data source that we defined right here. Also, we have this data-template equals template, and that's something that we haven't defined yet. And the template will be what the list view displays for each item in the list. So let's give it a template. A template is a Kendo UI template, which is HTML contained inside a script tag, which is given an ID and something other than JavaScript so that the browser won't try and parse it. Here we have an image that we're setting to the album art URL, and we have a definition list that we've bound to some values with this special templating syntax here, and then a link to the track MP3 as well as edit and delete buttons. Let's go ahead and collapse this script block here, and we will save this and go back to the application, refresh, and have a look. And that's really nice. This is the list view now pulling in all of our data from the server and displaying each one of these items in a list view item. But as you can see, we click on these buttons and they don't have any functionality yet. So let's implement editing in the list view and have a look at how that works. Now, if you recall from before, this button here would push a new item onto a tracks array. Well, that tracks array doesn't exist anymore, so let's go ahead and just blow this whole create method away and we'll start all over again. And our new method will create a new model object which will populate with the values from these bound variables, and we'll put that new model object, push it onto the data source, and then call the sync method on the data source, which will push all unsaved changes to the server. And then we'll clear the form back out by calling this.set on each one of these items which are bound to the UI. We also are going to need an edit method, and the edit method will select the list view item that contains the button that we just clicked and call the edit method on the list view, which will tell Kendo UI to put the list view into edit mode. We'll also need an update, and this will save the list view when we click the save button and save those changes to the server. We'll have a destroy, which will get a little bit of confirmation before we pull the rug out from underneath the user and delete this item. And then the last thing we'll do is allow them to bail completely by providing a cancel method. And all these e.prevent defaults just prevent the default action of an anchor, which is to take you to a different web page or a different point in the current page. Let's tell the data source as well how to handle these different CRUD operations, because currently it only knows about read. So we'll tell it what to do with an update, destroy, and create there, and that's good. And then we need to tell our list view that it has an edit template. And we do that by setting the data-edit-template, and we'll just give it edit template, which we need to create. And we'll do that here right below the current template. The edit template is going to look a whole lot like the add form in that it's just input boxes where we can change the string values and then save them back. And then each one of our buttons here, we're going to data bind to the view model with the bind the click event. So for the save button, that will be the update. And for the cancel button, we will data bind that to the cancel event. And then we'll do the same thing for the edit and delete buttons. We'll data bind this to edit. Perfect. And then we will data bind this one to delete, or in our case, destroy. And we use the destroy word instead of delete because delete is a reserved keyword in JavaScript. Plus destroy just sounds a whole lot more awesome. So if we just save this, we go back to our application, we can check out our full CRUD editing capability in the list view. Let's refresh. And now we can add an item. Now if I click the Add Track button, you can see that the track is added to our list of tracks, and if we refresh the page, it's still there because we've sent it to the server and it's been saved. And if we click the Edit button, this item is put into edit mode using our edit template, and we can correct some information. Click the Save button, and if I refresh the page, you'll see that our changes are saved. And since we're using the data source, we can do some really cool things with this application. Specifically, we can add paging, and it's very easy. So I could add a pager element here that has a data role of pager, and we set the data source to be the tracks, and then we just come down on the data source and set that we want our page size to be, let's say, 3 items. And then we can add a little bit of HTML5 magic, and we'll here change this out for an HTML5 audio tag, and this will enable audio controls directly in the page, and if the browser doesn't support it, then we'll fall back to just a link. And then here we'll just add a CSS class of this to album-art, and then check this out in the browser. And now we have some really cool CSS3 reflections, we have audio controls, we can page back and forth between the tracks, and with the magic of HTML5 we can actually play the tracks right through the browser. And that is a very high level overview of the brand new MVVM architecture and list view widgets in this version of Kendo UI.
Awesome demos, Burke. Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing that. I'm always impressed when I see those demos done so well. I'm also happy to say that there are some double prize treats here with today's webinar, kind of like that extra free coffee you sometimes get at Starbucks. There's a bonus webinar happening today, about an hour after this event concludes, where Burke will come back and go into even greater depth on how that demo you just saw is built and constructed using the newest things in Kendo UI Web. So if some of that went by a little bit too quickly, if you have some specific deep dive questions into what Burke was showing, then make sure you join him today, again, about an hour after this event concludes, and he'll go through all of that again at a much slower pace, and you can ask your questions and dive in deeper to using the new Kendo UI MVVM, list view, and some of the other new things in Kendo UI Web. If you want to register for that event, it's not too late. You can do it any point in time up to the time the event starts at bit.ly/Kendo bonus. Sign up for that and join us for a bonus webinar today. I'm also pleased to announce another bonus. It's actually kind of more like triple prizes today. We've been working with the community to make sure that even though Kendo UI provides pieces and framework components out of the box, we want to work very hard to integrate with the things that you may already be using and already love from the very vibrant JavaScript community that's out there today. And one of the places we received a lot of feedback, you have some very vocal members of this community, is from the Knockout.js community. So we're pleased to announce today a partnership with the community to build a collection of Kendo-specific extensions for Knockout.js. And all the credit in this case goes to our friend Ryan Niemeyer, who's been the lead on this community project. And Ryan has created a collection of extensions for Knockout.js targeting all the Kendo UI web widgets, and he's making it available under an open MIT license on GitHub, and it's available today for you to go check out and evaluate with Kendo UI. If you're not connected with Ryan, I'm sure he'd love to hear your feedback about the things he's doing with Knockout and Kendo UI. You can find him on Twitter, RP Niemeyer, and you can see the Twitter handle there. And if you want to go check out the early progress, you can find that at bit.ly/knockout-kendo, and those are case-sensitive URLs. We'd like to send out a big thanks to Ryan for all the work he's done on this. Ryan has put in his own time as a member of the Knockout.js community. Ryan's one of the Knockout.js contributors as well, I think one of 3, so a well-respected member of the Knockout community, and we love what he's doing to help Knockout users use Knockout.js with Kendo UI. It's not a library built officially by the Kendo UI team, so it is community supported, but we'd love to see the community coming around and doing this kind of neat work. So thanks a lot, Ryan. And if you like what Ryan's done and you're a member of the Knockout.js community, be sure to send him a thanks on Twitter as well. I'm sure he'd appreciate it. Let's talk about Kendo UI Data Viz. Kendo UI Data Viz adds a very significant new thing in this release, and that, of course, is the Kendo UI gauges. And you see that on the screen here happening. In fact, I'm going to hide the background here just briefly so you can see the gauges separate from the background image in this little demo. But in this release, we introduced two new gauges to Kendo UI Data Viz, the Kendo UI radial gauge and the accompanying linear gauge. This builds on top of the existing chart types that we've already provided in Kendo UI Data Viz. And as well in this release, we introduced another new chart type, the area chart, and the associated stacked area chart. So what we continue to do with Kendo UI Data Viz is build this into a premier HTML5 data visualization suite that you can use in your desktop web applications as well as for all of your mobile apps if you're adding Data Viz into those scenarios as well. And the Data Viz gauges are very cool. Not only do they allow you to have a lot of control and configuration over all the ways that they're presented and styled, you can do some pretty neat things interacting with them in your applications. To show off all of what's new in Kendo UI Data Viz in this release and to show you how you can work with the new gauges, though, I'm going to call another guest presenter up to our virtual keynote stage. Brandon Satcham, the new Kendo UI program manager here at Telerik, is going to join us now to show us what's new in Kendo UI Data Viz and how you work with some of these new things like the gauges. And just like Burke, I'm sure Brandon would love to hear your feedback, so you can follow him on Twitter at Brandon Satcham and let him know what you think of the demos or if you have any questions about what he's about to show you. So Brandon, the stage is now yours.
Thanks, Todd. Kendo UI Data Viz gives you the tools to create lightning-fast HTML5 based dashboard interfaces that look great on every browser and device. Our Q1 release builds on a great set of existing widgets with the addition of area and stacked area charts, multiple axis and plot band support on existing charts, as well as new radial and linear gauges. Before we get into the nitty-gritty with the new radial gauge type, I wanted to show you an example of Kendo UI Data Viz in the wild with a quick customer demo. CRH, an international building material company, uses Kendo UI Data Viz to share historical financial data on their site, and you can check it out for yourself at crh.com. If you go to their financials today, you'll see a line chart front and center of the screen. This is Kendo UI in action. And as I interact with the controls on the left-hand side of the screen, or the Kendo UI range slider at the top of the page, notice how the results are quickly redrawn in nice, smooth animations. And in addition to line charts, I can also click the bar option at the top left to see these same visualizations depicted with a different widget, all still powered by Kendo UI Data Viz. Now, as I've said already, it's easy to use Kendo UI to create your own compelling data visualizations, so I encourage you to try them out for yourself today. Now let's talk about one of the new goodies in Kendo UI Data Viz, gauges. Gauges are a class of charting widget designed to map range data into a visualization that bears familiarity to the physical world. The two most common types of gauges are radial and linear gauges. Radial gauges tend to have a circular or semicircular look, similar to a speedometer as depicted here, while linear gauges are, as the name suggests, linear, like a thermometer or ruler. These two types often overlap and can be used somewhat interchangeably, though linear gauges are most suited for progress data and radial gauges for scale values. Gauges are a great visualization to consider for when you want to measure progress towards a measurable goal, i.e. fundraising or sales goals, illustrate the current status of some value within a range of upper and lower bounds, i.e. current temperature of a measured object, or present an up-to-date, real-time summary of some fluctuating metric, like the current number of Twitter followers. Now let's take a look at Data Viz gauges in action. For this demo, I'm going to use a fictional running site called shoefodder.com. The purpose of this site is to provide runners with a way to keep track of the mileage they put on their running shoes so that they can replace those shoes after they wear out. The first demo I'll show you is on the track page, which I can access from the menu bar. I have a blank page now, but I'm going to add a list of all the shoes I own, along with a gauge that illustrates the current mileage I put on those shoes against the predetermined maximum value for each. Let's start by taking a look at the markup for this page. This is a pretty bare page so far. I have a simple div with an unordered list. This list will hold the list view widget for my page, but I'll need to create a template for that list as well. Let's do that now. Inside of this template, I'll set the name of each shoe, current and max mileage, and finally, the div element that will hold my gauge. Notice that I'm also setting some data metadata on each element. I'll use that information to initialize my gauge in a bit. With that structure set up, I can head over to my JavaScript and set things in motion. Now I'll start by creating a list view with some dummy data that I'd normally pull from a database or remote service. I'm also setting up the template property of my list view to the template that we just added in the HTML. Let's add the gauges to the gauge divs in our list view. I'm selecting all of the gauges by class, then creating a gauge for each, using the jQuery data method to pull off the custom metadata that I set inside of my Kendo template. Now here I'm also setting the pointer value to the current mileage of each shoe, then using that shoe-specific metadata to set the scale object of my gauge, including things like major and minor units, start and end angle of the gauge itself, and the max value, which is the maximum mileage for each shoe. I'm also using the shoe data to set green, yellow, and red ranges for my gauge. The specific length of each again is set based on shoe-specific data. Now with all of this information set, I can return to my page and see things in action. Pretty cool, huh? DataViz widgets are client-side, fluid, and dynamic, which means I can update them real-time to create compelling, live visualizations. Let's take a look at that now. I'm going to use the Shoe Fodder site again, this time on a fundraising page. Now, I do fundraising for some of my races, and it's nice to get a real-time view into how things are going. With Kendo UI DataViz gauges, the data source, the new list view, and a pager, I can do exactly that in no time at all. Now this time, my HTML is already in place. I have some information about the race in question, followed by some HTML for my list view, a pager, and a gauge. Finally, I have a template for the donors list view at the bottom of the page. Now the first thing that I'm going to do in my JavaScript to wire this up is to create the data source. I'm hitting a remote endpoint that returns a JSON result of all the people who have donated to the cause for my race. I'm setting the schema to the donor's root property and the page size to 4, so it'll only show the last 4 donors at any one time on the screen. Next, I'll create my gauge. Just as before, I'm setting some display angle and range properties, but I'm not setting the pointer value this time, as I'll do that later, and each time my data source is refreshed. One other property I'm setting here is the label's format property, which takes a format string that I can use to control the data displayed on the gauge. This string is telling Kendo to display gauge labels as currency in whole dollar amounts. With my gauge set up, I'll create my pager and list view, which both use the data source I've specified above. Then I'll bind a new function to the change event of my data source and update the gauge pointer value to the total of all my donations each time a new donation is added to my data source. Finally, I'm adding a set timeout, and this call will refresh my data source every 2 seconds, thus hitting the remote endpoint and fetching any new donations that have come in since the last call. With all this wired up, let's see it in action. So you'll notice here that I'm making the call every couple of seconds, and as the list continues to grow with donors, my gauge is updated with that nice smooth animation as well. DataViz gauges are a great way to add visualizations of progress, goal, or status data to your applications, and we're excited to offer them with Kendo UI DataViz in this release. In addition to the radial gauge type, we're also releasing a linear gauge, and I encourage you to go check out both today. Back to you, Todd.
Thank you very much, sir. Great demos, and thanks for showing off some of the cool things that we can do with Kendo UI DataViz. I'm happy to see I was a good donator there in your demo. The last and third piece of Kendo UI that we're going to talk about today is, of course, Kendo UI Mobile. This release marks the official introduction of Kendo UI Mobile, and it's important to set the stage about what we're doing with this new piece of the overall Kendo UI collection. When you talk about building things for mobile devices with HTML5, there are really 2 categories of approach. You can talk about building mobile sites, and you can talk about building mobile apps with HTML5. When we talk about sites, we're really primarily referring to things that have responsive UI, responsive design, things that will automatically adapt to the smaller screen sizes and device capabilities of a mobile device, but are really primarily alternate representations of a website. An app, on the other hand, is something that looks and feels like a native app, but is instead of being built with a native SDK, built with HTML and JavaScript. Kendo UI Mobile is aiming to serve this second category, the mobile app built with HTML and JavaScript. And one of the things we're doing very uniquely with Kendo UI Mobile is we're allowing you to construct a native-looking, a native-feeling app quickly with the widgets that we provide, and then automatically we will adapt the UI to the various devices where you may want to deploy your application. So in this example here, we can automatically adapt things like a tab strip, which looks native in iOS, to automatically look native in Android. Now, we're not subscribing or even promoting the idea of write once, run everywhere, but this is the fastest way to build mobile apps that can be tweaked to look native on the primary mobile platforms that dominate the market today. In fact, with today's release, we officially support iOS, Android, and BlackBerry platforms, allowing you to create one core application, receive the benefits of Kendo UI automatically adapting that UI to the native UI metaphors of these various platforms, and then giving you that extra time back to perfectly tweak each version of your app to make sure it looks great on all the devices you're supporting. Now, if we break down this little example I've constructed here, this Team Thing app, and we'll be publishing this demo after the release so you can dig into it and see a more complete functional application. In fact, we'll even be wrapping this up with PhoneGap and putting it in the App Store so you can really get your hands on it. Let's break down the various pieces of Kendo UI Mobile that are actually making this all work. First of all, in the middle, of course, we have a Kendo UI Mobile list view, and it's currently in its grouped mode, which is why we see those complete and in progress headers. The list view is a very fundamental piece of most mobile applications. If you're not building a game or some other very custom kind of UI, lists are often a core function of a mobile app, allowing you to do both navigation into sub-details and just scroll through long lists of data. In this official release, the Kendo UI Mobile list view also supports pull to refresh gestures. So if you want to have this bound to a data source and do that pull to refresh that's become very common, you can do that automatically out of the box with the Kendo UI Mobile list view. Also here we see the Kendo UI Mobile navbar and the tab strip. The navbar automatically positions and renders itself in the device native capacity. So here we see the kind of gradient styling that is native to iOS. In my demo app here, I've customized some of the colors, obviously, to fit the theme of my application, and that can easily be done with Kendo UI Mobile through simple background color changes. All the gradients remain the same and just layer on top of our background color. Really easy to do. And on the bottom, of course, for our navigation, we have the Kendo UI Mobile tab strip, which provides us that very iOS native feeling way of navigating through our applications, complete with icons also provided by Kendo UI Mobile. And surrounding all this, perhaps one of the most important pieces of Kendo UI Mobile is the application. The application provides a number of things to a Kendo UI mobile app, such as the ability to navigate between different views. It'll handle automatically all the history management so that we can go backwards and forwards through our views, as well as coordinating and choreographing the transitions between those views, giving us nice, smooth, animated transitions between views and making sure that they happen in the right direction. So as we navigate forwards and backwards through our application, everything looks right. And Kendo UI's mobile's application will do more than that. It will automatically render into the header of our page the meta tags necessary for mobile apps, and it gives us a very cool, reusable layout container, all HTML and JavaScript, no server here, that allows us to have reusable headers and footers surrounding our mobile app content. Very cool stuff. So when we pull this all together and we see this actually running in action, we actually see something like this. In fact, let's look at the code that pulls this all together just to kind of take a step towards that. It's very simple to configure all of these things with Kendo UI Mobile. In fact, it's very much driven by convention. You can see in this code here, which represents the view we just came from, several data-role attributes. This is how we configure our HTML with Kendo UI Mobile to tell the HTML what it should become when we initialize our application. So data-role layout, data-role header, navbar, footer, and tab strip. All of these have meaning to Kendo UI Mobile that will automatically happen when we initialize it. A couple of other interesting things to note here. Because this is a layout, this is the Kendo UI application reusable container. You can see my comment in the middle, view content rendered here. Kendo UI will automatically render any view in between the header and footer defined in this layout container. All JavaScript, all HTML, and that's a really nice way to keep our code dry, not repeating ourselves, so it's easy to maintain over time. And then in that last section, I also want to call your attention to the two things there. Data-icon, another attribute available in Kendo UI Mobile, allows us to automatically use icons in our buttons and in our tab strips and things of that nature, automatically provided by Kendo UI. Saves you some time from needing to go hunt down and find and style all the icons you need in your apps. For a lot of the core scenarios, we provide the icons you need right out of the box. And finally, the navigation between views is very simple as well. You can see I have 3 views or 3 navigation steps in this simple example, and one is simply a hashtag and then a string, so it's like an ID of an element, and the other 2 are actual HTML pages. Kendo UI Mobile application will automatically navigate and load local views when you provide an ID and remote views when you provide a path, and handle all that for you under the covers. Really simplifies your life. So now that we put this all together and we've explained the code, let's see this in action. And I'm going to load up my application here, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and add to the home screen so we get that real native app feel with our HTML and JavaScript created app. So Kendo UI Mobile application has helped me define the icon for my app, and now that I've installed it, I can load it up on my device, and we can check out how it works. All this built, of course, with Kendo UI Mobile. So let me log out and start from the beginning. I'm going to go ahead and log in here with my user account to this Team Thing demo. And again, we'll make this available after today's keynote. So I'll type in my email address and my little demo password. You can notice that we've got the little toggle switch here, which we could use to toggle our settings to remember me. But for now, I'm just going to sign in, select a team. These teams, of course, are presented in a Kendo UI list view. Click Confirm Selection. All these are Kendo UI buttons styled to fit my app. And now we see the main view of the app, where we once again have our list view, which I can tap on items and scroll over to see the item's detail. Click on the back button to go back to my main view. And notice as I do this, all those navigation steps are being handled and choreographed by the Kendo UI application for me. We slide in and we slide out, so we're not just perpetually drilling in. And I can navigate between views as well. And here we can see a scroll view inside of my application, and I can flick between different cards and then navigate back to my main view, and it's right there, and we navigate backwards to properly do that. Now let me start over with another scenario just to also reiterate that you can use pieces of Kendo UI together. So I'm going to come in with a different account, this time not associated with an ID, and just show you that toggle there. I'm going to sign in, and this account is not associated with a team, so I'm going to select to choose an existing team. And here we find a Kendo UI Web autocomplete. And we're using Kendo UI Web templating in this as well, and that's why you see those little locks next to private teams. So not only can you use Kendo UI Web with Kendo UI Mobile, but you can also use Kendo UI Data Viz with Kendo UI Mobile. So by combining all the pieces of Kendo UI, you have a very powerful framework for building applications with Kendo UI for mobile apps. So that's a complex demo, and more than we can probably show you for constructing today. So let me just jump over into some code and show you how quick and how easy it is to work with Kendo UI Mobile to build your first native-feeling mobile application with HTML and JavaScript. Let's jump over to some code. So far, a lot of the demos we've seen today have been demoed on Macs and been demoed in other text editors. But I know a lot of you joining us today are Windows developers, and you're developing inside of Visual Studio. So for this next demo, I'm going to go ahead and use Visual Studio just to show you that Kendo UI can be developed anywhere where you're working today. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and create a new project so you can see the entire process and see that there's no magic going on when we create this Kendo UI mobile application. I'm going to simply select the ASP.NET MVC web application template and click OK. And we're going to go ahead and just create an empty view. And it really doesn't matter what's happening on the server side here, because all of our Kendo UI mobile actions and view and all the code are going to live in the front end. The server part really doesn't matter at this stage of our development or for our demo. If you're using PHP or any other server-side language, this would work just the same. And to my project, I'm just going to come in here and add an HTML page. So I'm going to select Add New Item, and let me just go ahead and add a basic HTML page. And we'll call this app.html. And this is what we'll add our code to. Now, by default, this template gives me some code I don't need, so I'm going to go ahead and simplify this doc type down to a much more pleasant HTML5 doc type and get rid of this unnecessary XML namespace declaration. And now we have a much cleaner starting point for our Kendo UI mobile app. In fact, let me go ahead and give this title My App, so we've got that set as well. So installing Kendo UI is really always as easy as simply copying and pasting in references to style sheets and JavaScript. And to help me do that today, I've got some snippets that are going to save me some typing time. So I'm going to first add to this my Kendo UI styles, including the styles we're going to need to work with Kendo UI Mobile. So I'm going to come in here and paste this in. And you can see that I've added a few things from my CDN so far, the Kendo Common style sheet, as well as the default theme, and you could use a different theme, as well as the themes for mobile and data viz, or the styles for mobile and data viz. These could obviously be combined in a real app, so you have a single request instead of multiple requests, but I want it to be very clear what we're adding for today's demo. And the only other thing I need to do to add Kendo UI Mobile or any part of Kendo UI to my project is add the JavaScript. So I'm going to add my JavaScript references, and this pulls in a reference to jQuery, the one external dependency for Kendo UI, as well as a minified reference to my Kendo All script, which will include the new pieces for Kendo UI Mobile. And that's it. Now I'm actually ready to start developing with Kendo UI. I've got the necessary pieces that Kendo UI is going to need to do the parts that it provides. So let me bring some HTML into my application. And I'm going to start by just creating a very basic Kendo UI mobile view. And you can see I've pasted HTML that includes the data-role view, just as we discussed before. And then I've added some HTML, a div data-role header, inside of that data-role navbar, hello mobile world, and then data-role footer. If we were to view this page at this point in time, and let's just do that quickly in a browser, we'd find that what we have here is just standard HTML, nothing funny or fancy at this point in time. In fact, we'll let our application server spin up, and there it is. HTML doesn't look special, definitely doesn't look mobile, it's just the HTML as we'd expect it to look in a browser. So in order for this HTML to become something better, we need to apply a little JavaScript to this. So I'm going to come into my page here, and below where I've added my Kendo UI scripts, I'm going to initialize my application with a little bit of JavaScript. In fact, one line of JavaScript is all that's necessary. Inside of a function that will fire when the page loads, I simply say new kendo.mobile.application. When I do that, it'll automatically look for my Kendo UI data roles inside of my body tag and initialize Kendo UI Mobile. So let's save this and see what result that produces in the browser with that one change. Now this is starting to look like a mobile application. By default, it's going to look like an iOS application, though if we were to load this right now on an Android device, it would look like an Android application. That's the Kendo UI Mobile Automatic Adapting. So right away, this is starting to look a lot more mobile. I haven't had to do anything, so let's take this a little bit further and add some kind of navigation to the footer of my application as well. So I'll come back here to my app, and we'll copy and paste in here a Kendo UI Mobile tab strip. And my tab strip, as you can see, is data-role tab strip, and you can see that I've added two navigation buttons. Both of these buttons are using the hashtag navigation, which means they're looking for views with the ID home and the ID search in the current page, so my app.html page. If I were to change these to home.html or search.html, Kendo UI Mobile would look for those as external views and try to load them automatically for me. You can also see I'm taking advantage of Kendo UI's built-in icons, as we talked about before, and let's see what kind of result this produces. No additional JavaScript, just a little extra HTML. Go back to my browser, reload this, and there you go. Now I've got a tab strip that looks native to iOS in my application where it should be positioned correctly. If I had scrolling content here in the middle, this would remain fixed at the bottom and the content would scroll in between my header and footer. And I can navigate between my different views if they existed. But we don't have that search view yet, so clearly we need to add another search view here. So I come back to my application. The easiest way to do this, obviously, or at least you would think it would be, is to come in here and copy my first home view, paste this, make the ID search, call this my search view just for simplicity, and this would be functional. Now we have two views in the page. They both have the necessary IDs to support navigation. And if we were to go back to our application and rebrowse it, you can see that we could now navigate between home and search. And you see that content changing. But this is not exactly the easiest way to maintain an application. What if I want to add a third button? Now I have to go repeat myself in multiple places. So what Kendo UI Mobile adds to the application is a layout container. And the layout provides reusable header and footers so that the views can simply contain the content specific to each view. So let's refactor this to use our layout instead. So I'm going to come and remove the HTML we've added so far and add the HTML that has the refactoring. Now, instead of copying and pasting all of my header and footer content for every view, I have in my home and search views only the content. And now I've added an additional div with div-role layout. So I have two views and a layout, and my layout's been given a name, an ID basically, through the data-ID attribute called default. Inside of my layout, we find the things that used to live inside of my views, a data-role header, data-role navbar, and my footer and my navigation in that footer. The only thing we need to do now to tell our views to use this layout by default is to add a little bit of code or configuration options to our application constructor. So if I come back down to my JavaScript, I'll paste in one more snippet. And now what I'm telling my application is when you create the application, by default, the views should use a layout with a data-ID called default. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and add a default animated transition that Kendo UI Mobile will automatically handle for us as we move from one view to the next. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's reload our application and see where we're at. So now we see our application load up, and let's go ahead and navigate. And look at that. Can you see that slide view happening between the two views? And notice as I go from one view to the next, it's handling the appropriate reverse animation. So it always looks like I'm going in the right direction, not like a constantly going down into my application. So now we can see how the layout has automatically handled the header and the footer for both of my views, making it much easier to maintain this over time. So let's make my views a little bit more interesting. In fact, let's go to my home view specifically and dress that up a little bit. So go back to my application, and rather than just displaying some hello world text, I'm actually going to integrate a little bit more into this. And go back to my snippets here, and I'm going to grab some HTML, and we'll paste this in. And what this will do is give us a place to actually add some Kendo UI data viz charts and gauges to my application. And all of these charts and gauges will be inside of a Kendo UI Mobile scroll view, which will allow me to flick through those charts in my application and look at each as they're presented. So I've got the basic HTML I need for that. Now I just need some JavaScript to initialize all of my data viz. So I'm going to come down to my application, and in my page load, after I initialize my app, I'm going to go ahead and drop in some JavaScript that's going to go ahead and set up my charts and gauges. And I'm going to use just some static local data for now, just so we can show the idea. But obviously, you could bind this to remote or local data arrays, however you want to get your data into your app. And to make sure that this all works properly for my devices, I'm going to add a little bit of CSS just to give my items, my charts and my gauges, some dimension. So I'm going to drop in a little snippet of CSS, which, as you can see, simply sets height, width, and a display property for my items. So let's go ahead and save this and review my application one more time. And we had a little bit of a mistake here, so let's see what happens. Let's go back and check this in Visual Studio. And I'm betting it's from some of the code I dropped in here for my JavaScript. So let's scroll down here. And yep, look at that. I've got a little bit of an extra hanging out here marker, and I should have used Teleworks Just Code in Visual Studio to indicate that to me because we have full JavaScript parsing. So I bet if I get rid of that, we'll be back in business. So let's go back over here and reload my app. There we go. So now I've got my application, my header, my footer, and you can see that here's my Kendo UI data viz chart that's been rendered here inside of a Kendo UI mobile scroll view, which allows me to slide between each of my data viz items and ultimately to the new gauge, as Brandon showed us earlier in his demo. I can flick between these, and I can still navigate between my views and navigate back to home, and it all just works, and it looks native. If I were to load this up on my iOS device, it would actually look even better there than it looks here inside of this testing browser. But of course, one of the things that's neat about Kendo UI Mobile is that it helps us automatically adapt these apps to different devices, so that if I wanted this to reach iOS and Android users, I'd have a head start on getting it to look right for Android devices as well. So let me show you how I can just force that test with Kendo UI Mobile in Chrome so we can see what it would look like if this were to be loaded on Android. So I'm going to come up here, and after my application is initialized, I'm going to add one line of JavaScript code that will simulate as if I were on an Android device. And we can do that through simple changing of some CSS classes, because that's what Kendo UI uses ultimately to determine how the widgets should be displayed. And if I go back to my application and reload it, we can now see that automatically, without changing any code, all I did was change some classes for our testing scenario, that my tab strip has moved to the top of the screen as the navigation usually exists on Android. The styling is changed with these new blue bars. And in the scroll view as well, we can see instead of having the dots, we now have these long blue bars, which are more native to an Android platform than iOS. So Kendo UI Mobile is going to great lengths to help my application feel more native on the target devices that I'm aiming to reach, which saves me a lot of time when I want to build an app that reaches all mobile users. So clearly this is not as complex as the Team Thing demo application I showed you before, but this shows you just how easy it is to get started building native looking and feeling apps with HTML, JavaScript, and Kendo UI Mobile. And we'll jump back over to our core presentation, and let's bring it into the home stretch. So hopefully you enjoyed that demo and the ways that you work with Kendo UI Mobile, and hopefully you've seen it's very easy to do. In summary, Kendo UI today and what we're shipping is a collection of mobile UI widgets, which adapt to the various device platforms on which they run, and core application framework pieces, like the Kendo UI application itself, which provides navigation, history and state management, as well as the transitions between views. Now it's your chance to show off and show us what you can do, not only as a mobile app developer, but as an HTML and JavaScript wizard, and what you can do with Kendo UI Mobile. I'm really pleased to announce today the introduction of the Kendo UI Mobile App Contest, and it's really pretty straightforward. Download Kendo UI Mobile, build an app, and then submit it by April 19th. You can find all the details for the Kendo UI Mobile App Contest, including all the requirements for the app and where you need to submit it, at kendoui.com/app contest. But there are going to be some great prizes for the best apps that are submitted through this contest over the next 4 weeks, including another Kendo UI mobile device pack, which includes a new iPad, a Samsung Galaxy Tab, BlackBerry Playbook, and an iPod Touch. We'll be giving one of these device packs away today to a lucky winner from today's live event. But if you don't win today, this is your other chance for winning this amazing pack of devices. Build an app with Kendo UI Mobile, submit it by April 19th, and you could be in the drawing for another one of these device packs. In fact, more than a drawing, you'll be in an actual upright vote. All apps will come in and will be initially judged by some Kendo UI experts, and then the top 5 apps will be presented in a public online vote, and the app that receives the most votes there will receive the grand prize device pack. So cool way to win some more prizes. I encourage you to go to kendoui.com/app contest today. Do it as you download Kendo UI Mobile and check out a way you can win some cool stuff for simply building an app with Kendo UI. Now, we've covered a lot of territory over the last almost hour, and I'm sure for many of you, one of the main questions that remains is, what does this all cost and how does this all work and relate to me? Now, of course, we know that there are a lot of free options out there for building things with JavaScript, and a lot of them we think are really great. People have done some neat things in the community. The primary difference, of course, between Kendo UI and many of the free options is that we are building software that is designed to support you. We are here to help you be successful building software with HTML and JavaScript. So whereas open source projects often expect you to support them and you have to maintain and upgrade them, we are here to support you. We want to make our software the best we can make it for you and make you a wizard at the things you're building with HTML and JavaScript. So as we say that, we have some licensing around Kendo UI that supports that model. Kendo UI Web remains the same as it was introduced at the end of last year. A commercial license is available for $399, which includes all of our professional support, access to our extra tools and things of that nature, as well as being available under an open source GPL license. So it's a dual license framework. So if your project's open source and GPL compatible, we'd love for you to take advantage of that license and do some cool things with Kendo UI Web there. Kendo UI DataViz and Mobile, meanwhile, are commercial-only licenses, and Kendo UI DataViz is available today for $399, and Kendo UI Mobile and all the cool things we just saw there is available for just $199 today with the official release. Now, I showed you some examples of where you can use all of these things together, and really combining them all gives you one of the best development toolboxes for HTML and JavaScript. So we are also introducing today a way of getting everything together for a savings, and that is through the new Kendo UI Complete. So with Kendo UI Complete for $699, you get all of Kendo UI, everything we have to offer, as well as all the things we are going to offer this year. And there are 2 more major releases on the table for this year, and I can guarantee you there's going to be some big and fun improvements as we work our way towards the end of 2012. Of course, a Kendo UI Complete license includes professional support, priority influence on our roadmap, access to a full year of updates, and all of the private builds and service packs that we deliver. So as you need improvements, don't worry about doing them yourselves. Ask us, and we're here to help you. We can very often improve our own code to make your lives easier. And there's some extra tools like the custom Kendo UI download builder, which can help you build optimized builds and downloads of Kendo UI with only the tools you're using on KendoUI.com. So Kendo UI Web, DataViz, and the new Kendo UI Complete, all available today, all available individually and separately, or together under the Kendo UI Complete license. And as a reminder, all existing customers of Kendo UI Web, all commercial license holders, are getting a complimentary upgrade to Kendo UI Complete today. It's our way of saying thank you for being an early supporter of Kendo UI and for helping us get to where we are right now. We want to say thanks and give you access to everything new. So all existing Kendo UI customers will be upgraded to Kendo UI Complete, and you should see that in your accounts in the next few days as all the licenses get upgraded. And with that, that's only really one thing left to do, and that is to go download Kendo UI today. We really appreciate you coming out and spending this hour with us. And as a parting gift, we also want to make available to all of you who've attended the live webinar one more special thing, and that is an exclusive Keynote promo to everybody who's here live today. It's a limited time promo, expires in 1 week, so you need to act fast. We want to do that so it really does benefit those of you who are here today. And it gives you 20% off any Kendo UI purchase over the next week. So you can see the code here on your screen. Simply copy that down, and we'll be sure to distribute this to you through the follow-up emails after today's event. But we want to thank you for coming out and spending this time with us today to help bring in and celebrate and learn all about what's new in this latest release from Kendo UI, and use that to go and save yourself some money and grab yourself a commercial license, which will really help your next project. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming today. Go download KendoUI.com and stay tuned for a lot of updates as we continue the conversation on Twitter and on Facebook, and of course on KendoUI.com and through the blogs. Otherwise, we're about to transition into an extended Q&A portion of today's event where I'll stick around live and answer a few more questions. As we make this transition, you may see your screen go black for a few seconds as we load up some of the Q&A tools, so stay tuned. We'll come back in with the Q&A, and then we'll continue today's presentation answering all of your questions. Thank you very much for joining us, and now we're going to tune into the Q&A.